right, welcome everybody. Welcome everyone. Can you hear me? All right, come on in, sit down, get comfortable. We're going to get into it. Welcome to the second meeting here of the Design Advocacy Group at the Philadelphia Ethical Society. Welcome. My name is Eli Storch. I chair the Design Advocacy Group. As we enter our 25th year, DAG is now a 25-year-old organization, which is pretty wonderful. And good timing for our one of our founders here for today's presentation. So we're going to have some advocacy items. Sure did. We're going to have some advocacy items, and then we're going to get into it. So if you have anything you want to share with us, if you have anything that you're working on, exhibitions, interesting events, news that you need to share with our group, please raise your hand. I will give you an opportunity to do that when we get into it. But we like being here together. It's nice to have the whole group together. So what I usually do is I look at the watch I'm not wearing, and I put a minute on the clock and ask you to say hi to someone within an arm's reach of yourself. Check in with them if you don't know them, get to know them a little bit and why they're here, and we'll be right back. Start to wrap those up, exchange some emails, phone numbers, the whole deal. All right. If you can hear me, start to bring your attention back here. Thank you very much. So when I said items that everyone needs to know about, Paul's hand shot up. So Paul Stanky, what do you have for us?
RSVP, just show up. Let's have a big crowd to protest the Park Service taking down the panels at the President's House site. Tuesday, February 3rd, 3:30 p.m.
Thank you for preempting my slide. But that is the next big step for the President's House here in Philadelphia. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, please.
On that same line, this Friday at 10 o'clock, there will be a high school group meeting at the President's House to protest, and others are welcome to come with their sign and join with the students.
Yes, that's on February 10th, correct?
No, I'm talking about this Friday.
Okay, so, yes.
Well, there's another demonstration on the 10th.
Yeah, that's what Paul was saying. So we've got them, I think we have both of those demonstrations covered. Anything else as we move along here? Since we only saw each other a week ago, not too much has happened, but this was good news that Councilman Young is not pushing forward on his spot zoning bill. So we will see what is to come with this. The bill is not inherently dead at this point, but he's not moving forward with it, which I think is the best for everybody, the whole city. So glad to see that that's the way that is working out. I did want to mention we just booked this March 18th. We'll be back here with Raheem Manning talking about We changed the date. You're all right, I'm wrong. But March 26th we will be back here. That is right, you're all right, I was wrong. March 26th we'll be back in this room together with Raheem Manning. He's going to go over what it means to be the nighttime mayor, what the 24/7 economy looks like, and all the things they're doing to try to build that up. We are close to announcing events for April and then into May. We may be here, we may be elsewhere, so keep your eyes open. We're trying to send just a few more e-blasts to make sure everyone knows where we're going to be so we're easier to find. That's what we have coming up, and we appreciate you sticking with us wherever we wander. With that, I want to jump right in tonight. I want to bring up George Claflin, my colleague on the DAG Steering Committee, who's going to introduce Alan, bring him up, and we can get into our program. So please join me welcoming George, and he'll get us started. So this mic is too loud, so stay away from it. I'm going to get both of them fixed. So you're going to have to share this with
This
Alan.
one's too loud.
Yeah, so just keep it away from yourself, but you'll share it with Alan.
Okay. Oh. It's such an honor to be here tonight to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Alan Greenberger. And I want to tell you a few things that I did not know until this week also, that he, of course, and I want to recognize his biggest fan is here, Greta in the front row. He is, among other things, a graduate of Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York. And I want to tell you what that indicates. Let me see, where do I have it? Some other graduates of Madison High School include Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Chuck Schumer. I'm trying to get my list here. There they are. Bernie Sanders, Judge Judy, and my favorite, Carole King. Alan told me that he informed them of some of his achievements recently and didn't even get an acknowledgement. But we're happy to acknowledge that. He's a graduate of RPI, School of Architecture. He was there, I believe, when Patrick Quinn was the dean. He worked and was a partner at MGA for 34 years, winning many design awards, and we're going to talk about a few of those buildings tonight. We're not going to do a complete retrospective of his career by any means. In 2017, he won the National Jefferson Award from the Thomas Jefferson Award from the AIA National. In 2023, AIAPA gave him their Medal of Distinction, and in 2015, I believe he won the Harbison Award from Philadelphia AIA. And the trajectory here is very important. He moved from an architect who did public buildings very, very well to an architect who became a public official, and I think he served the public very, very well in that capacity. Among the many things that he did, first as the executive director of the Planning Commission, and then as the deputy mayor in charge of economic development and planning, he initiated the first comprehensive plan since Ed Bacon's time, and that was the Philadelphia 2035 plan, and that won a national APA award, American Planning Association award in 2013. So I think you've probably seen the introduction that's on the website. I'm not going to read that to you, but you'll see some of the buildings that are mentioned there on the slides. And what we prepared for this. We had a 2-hour conversation a few weeks ago. We had another conversation yesterday. We prepared a few slides as triggers to a conversation, and then we're going to move that conversation to a discussion where we hope that everybody will feel free to comment, ask questions, or otherwise discuss. So let's bring Alan up and
I realize it's bad form to be walking up with a glass of wine, but we're all friends. Well, good.
we decided to do this in sort of a chronological order to parallel that transition from an architect doing public buildings to an architect who works for the public as a public official. So we're going to start with 2 projects that are very well known to the public, one of which is very well known, namely the Mann Center, and the other one maybe a little less well known, the Kroc Center, which is a recreational facility. And we'll get right into it. So we'll start here.
So, what's up?
It's on. Okay. We had the red lines are Alan's work, in addition to the site plan that's underlying it, and he, I think, can explain to you what's going on there.
Oh, good. Oh, it's my turn. Okay. Well, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge, an awful lot of friends in this audience, and more importantly, all of you have contributed to what DAG has become. That's really the critical thing, and I want to make a particular note, and I apologize if I'm leaving somebody out, but past chairs of DAG, Joanne, who's sitting over there, raise your hand, Joanne, and I'm pretty sure I saw Kiki come in. There she is in the back, hiding. And the other one I want to acknowledge, and we'll get into more of this in a minute, but you talked about my high school and all these, hot people that were graduates of it. I'm not sure about Carol King, by the way, but that's all right. She may have gone to the other high school called Midwood, but either way, the most important other colleague from Madison was also past chair Elise Vider. May she rest in peace. And Elise and I we were 1 year apart, but this was a high school of 4,000 kids. So the idea that you were going to know anybody or know a lot of other people, we didn't know each other at all, and we only found each other through the Foundation for Architecture and the Civic Issues Committee, and I think we were walking down the street one time, and the whole Brooklyn thing came up, and then the high school thing came up, and then it's like, yeah, what year were you? And so she was 1 year ahead of me. She was class of '68. So that was always nice. I always have a very soft spot in my heart for Elise. So, this. George was nice enough to pull a couple of slides together. It wasn't really my intention to talk about that work, but we thought it would be just of limited interest just to say, how did this is all about, how did this come about? This is DAG's 25th year. How did this come about? And at least for me, a lot of it came about because of the work that we did at MGA Partners, and in particular, a couple of projects that are up on, one of which is up on the screen, that is so much about the public realm. And in fact, the Mann Center project up there, that was, I think, our original phase 1 site plan for the Mann, was really a fantastic project because it reconsidered what this big venue was in the park, which was, if you look at the part around the red line around the house itself, for those of you who remember back when, that was the Mann Center. You'd go up there, and there would be a fence, and you'd go through the fence, and then you were right there in the seats. And Peter Lane, who was the executive director at the time, said, we've got to make this thing a more pleasant experience for our guests. And so the plan was really about expanding out into the park. We worked a lot with the park, at the time, the Fairmount Park Commission, to create an outdoor lobby, to use the hillside as a way of getting up to the top, which at the top, I can't point, but at the top of the hill there was probably one of the best views of Philadelphia there is. And really create, we call it a campus, but really create a bona fide public place. And if you could, can I switch? Can I do this? Let's see. No, that's backwards. Let's try this. Okay. That resulted in this really wonderful venue that can hold its own against places like Ravinia in Chicago or Wolf Trap in outside of Washington. But this one, and people talk about Tanglewood, of course. Tanglewood's in vacation country. It's not an urban place. This is one of the truly few genuinely urban summer venues. Now Chicago has the park downtown, but even Ravinia is out of town, Wolf Trap's out of town, Hollywood Bowl is in town. So, I mean, for me, this was a great experience that led to being asked to put together the Centennial District Plan, which we did in 2005, that little pieces have got done, and now people are talking about more, This is Philadelphia. Things don't happen quickly in Philadelphia, as we all know. But then the other one, I want to get through this quickly, was the Kroc Center. How many of you know the Kroc Center up in, it's a fair bit of people. I loved getting involved in this project because, first of all, Mrs. Kroc's mission statement was to create community centers throughout the country that were the equivalent of anything that would ever get built in a very wealthy neighborhood. That was almost her quote. She wanted to do it through the Salvation Army, which is an organization that she respected. And the Army had picked this site that was kind of in a funny in-between Allegheny West, other parts of North Philadelphia, Germantown, a little bit of East Falls, but in between in an old industrial area where the Bud manufacturing facilities were. So it wasn't exactly the world's most becoming site, but it was right there in the middle. They had crafted a program, and this sketch, which was my sketch, of a kind of really public place on a very publicly accessible piece of land and there it is today with just astonishingly good facilities. I think a real example of Mrs. Kroc's vision for it, but mostly the way we got, that I personally got so enmeshed in the world of the public world. And what the public, these are not technically a public project, the man is, but this isn't. But it's really about the public environment. And so you want to stop there, George, and say something? Okay.
Yes, I want to say a couple of things. We're going to get to Alan as educator. I'm not omitting Drexel and his distinguished work there from this. But this is the hook where we go to DAG for a moment. DAG's first big advocacy fight was the Jefferson Garage. And we went to the mat on this. The garage was in the wrong place, and the site was an entire city block. The garage could have been anywhere. We wanted it to be done as a donut, where the garage was in the center and other uses were around the edge. As we were aware that we were losing this battle, Alan made this beautiful sketch, and people when we would meet with, like, Kevin Feely, among other people, was the PR person representing the owners. He said, what do we have to do now? We have to meet with DAG? And we said, yes, that's right, you have to. And we've made that a rule, in the sense that we don't comment on something unless we've met or at least invited the owner. But if the owner doesn't wish to come and talk to us, we will comment anyway.
So we should now, this is the moment to sort of step back just to the actual true origins of DAG. If you, those of you remember, the Foundation for Architecture, may it rest in peace too, disbanded in 2000, maybe 2001, and I was on the board at the time. Bill Becker of Becker and Frondorf, that Bill Becker, for those of you who know the many Bill Beckers in this town, was head of the Civic Issues Committee, which was an advocacy committee. And one of the things that I did as a board member when the foundation shut down was find sort of homes, foster homes, for all the programs that were in it. It wasn't that hard to do, but nobody really wanted civic advocacy because, you know, why would they? That was about being potentially annoying to a number of people. So Bill Becker and I were at lunch in front of at the old Society Hill Hotel Cafe back in 2001, and we said, well, you think if we tried to start anything, do you think anybody would be interested? We said, yeah, maybe. And we called upon a few friends. I think there were 4 of them. I'm not 100% sure I remember who the 4 was. You may have been one of them, George, I'm not sure.
I was at the second meeting.
You're the second one. So the first one was at the Racket Club of all places, which I thought was bizarre, but Bill was a member of the Racket Club. And we, 2 became 6, 6 became 10. We started meeting at my office at MGA. We quickly outgrew it. George was at that point very involved, as was David Brownlee, who's been involved from the very beginning. And George was able to sort of convince his, colleagues at Temple downtown to give us space on every Thursday mornings and every month at 8 a.m. And this thing slowly grew to the point where 4 and 5 years later, it was attracting actually, 50, 60 people to every meeting. But before that, in 2002 probably, if I have my dates right, this issue came up. And we said, wait a minute, Jefferson's going to build this massive garage on Chestnut Street? What a terrible idea that was. And we sort of said, hey, we're here to complain about it. I remember their attorney, Carl Primavera, who's actually become something of a friend. I remember Carl saying, well, wait a minute, who are you guys anyway? And we said, well, we're here. We're organized, sort of, and we're here to complain about why this is a terrible idea. We came up with some alternatives. Jefferson insisted that the garage had to be on Chestnut Street because they were going to build this giant cancer center on Sansom Street, a little closer to the main core of the hospital. Well, if you've been there lately, you know that it's 25 years later and the rest of the site is empty. And the garage, while I'd say nicely dressed up as far as garages go, has abysmal retail on the ground floor, as one could have predicted, because garages generally don't do well with retail unless they specifically think about how to create space and sizes that can make retail happen. And even then, garages are simply not the best finders of retail. I think it's as simple as that. So we have a block with this reasonably looking good garage, reasonable, for 2/3 of the block, and really weak retail. And it's a gap in the city. It's a gap in the fabric of the city. It's a gap somewhat in its walkability. I'm sure we were right about our criticisms of it. The cancer center never got built. I do remember that, and I don't, I want to be careful not to say this too meanly about Jefferson, but I remember at the time their complaint to us was, you can't get in the way of this. We're going to build a cancer building. And of course, they didn't, because of whatever reason, they didn't. So it's a little reminder also that things that are happening at the moment are not necessarily things that are going to happen later on. But it was DAG's first sort of go to the mat fight. We lost, you know.
Well, we won the moral battle.
We won a moral battle, but we certainly lost the real battle. And I would say, I mean, I don't know how you all feel about it, but I would say, is it a catastrophe? No. Is it bad? Yes. It's not something that should have happened where it happened. It didn't have to be that way. It needed more thought. And of course, we can get into all kinds of issues, as I suspect we will, about things that needed more thought.
Well, one more finishing thing on the Jefferson Garage. Long after it was built, Jefferson got a new president, and this time of year, I got a call from the president's executive assistant, said, "Can you come over with a few people from DAG? President would like to see you." Sure. So we went over there, and he had his planners with him, people we knew well from the fight. And he said in front of them, "The garage is in the wrong place. It's a mistake, but we can't change it." So we were vindicated right by the by the most important representative of the institution. But that's how mistakes last for decades, generations.
So, DAG is 25 years old. That's rather astonishing that this thing has lasted for 25 years. When Bill and I founded it, we swore to each other that we were not going to let this be an entity that had staff and space we had to pay for. We didn't want to be raising money, and we did it all really through volunteers, through email, and eventually, and I know Feather is here. There you are, Feather. Feather was head of the William Penn Foundation, and for Feather, and then for Sean McCaney, who came later, called us every now and then and said, "We want to give you money. You should sort of figure out a way to be an entity that could take money." And we kept saying we didn't want it. We didn't want to be an entity that could take money. Now, eventually, we did need to take some money. We needed to have a website, and so we were able to secure that funding, and we did it through a friendly other legitimate nonprofit organization, and that was the first DAG website. But this thing exists, and all of you and all of your participation exists because we want it to. I mean, it's as simple as that. It doesn't need a lot of legitimate, as in legal, efforts to make it so. The fact that you're here makes it so, and the fact that you've been doing it for 25 years is really an absolutely extraordinary thing. And so, while Bill and I may have kicked this off, it's on the back of all of you, and I particularly give kudos, George, to you and to David and Craig Shelter, who have been with this thing forever, and have made this thing stick. And of course, then drawing attention like this. We just came up the other day. We now live in Greta and I live in the Philadelphian, and there was a meeting about ICE, and not ICE holding back our cars, but the other ICE. And and there was concern about what do we do? Should we get authorization from the board? And finally I said, this thing exists because we say it exists. It's that simple. That's what DAG is. And so really kudos to all of you because of that. And by the way, I guess another little piece of the story. So Bill was the chair of this for the first, 6 years. And then Bill said, "Okay, I'm done." So I was the chair of it. That was in 2007. And I think somewhere around 2006, there was this building concern about the city's sort of structural point of view about planning, about design excellence, about what was going on in the city, which admittedly was not even half of what has gone on since. And we would meet regularly with our friends from the William Penn Foundation, Feather, and her colleagues. And Feather tells this story that I've heard, a couple of times. Don't be embarrassed. Where we were all probably sitting around the big conference table at William Penn and complaining and bitching. And Feather reports, I don't remember this, by the way, but Feather says that I said, if we're going to do something about this, somebody's going to have to step up and be part of some kind of official something. And the next year, I found myself being interested in Mike Nutter, and slightly after that, found myself as the chief planner of the city of Philadelphia. So I guess, Feather, you tell that story to say, well, you said it, and now it was. But that's just me. I mean, you know, this is still all of you. And here's the thing about DAG that's so interesting to me. DAG by itself is a piece of what has changed in this city. And what I would say, what's changed is that I would say the expectation of excellence in planning and design has risen significantly. The bar is majorly raised. Our expectations are different, and DAG has played a significant role in this. But there are others who have played an equally significant role in this. People like Paul Levy's out here from the Center City District. I think I see Inga over there. Inga's writing is a piece of this. Eventually, the City Planning Commission, that I'm very proud of, and the Nutter administration is a piece of this. Ann Fedulin, during the Kenny administration, is a piece of this. And all of you are a piece of this in raising the bar of what we expect to happen in this city. And it happened to come at a time, particularly around 2010, 2011, when the recession was starting to abate. And we found people were interested in Philadelphia, both investors, outside national interests outside of Philadelphia, but even within the city itself, that wanted to do better and wanted to do more, and population was growing, job base was growing, not spectacularly, but growing for the first time in 50 years probably, and we were reforming zoning, we were trying to put together a new plan. So there was an awful lot that happened during that time, and I mentioned Feather and the William Penn Foundation, and in the background was the William Penn Foundation making things happen back there, and making things like the Delaware River waterfront plan that my friend Harris really led. Are you in the audience, Harris? Harris. Other Harris. Steinberg. Yes. Thank you. You know, just an incredible assemblage of people coming from the academic side, from the nonprofit side, from the city side, from the commercial side even, to change the culture of this city. And I think, George, I'm going to move on to the, oh no, I'm sorry, going back.
No, that's too far. Yeah.
This is what you wanted. So here's one, I guess I'm stepping back in time a little bit. You want to talk about this?
Can I just
Yeah,
say something by way of introduction here? I taught at Temple for over 30 years, and we had no money to pay jury members, which was a huge problem. Alan, I don't think he ever turned me down for a jury. He came to probably 60 juries over that period of time, maybe more. And he was obviously an excellent jury member as well. I want to go back to one more incident from DAG's founding. At that second meeting, someone who I will remain nameless was at the table and said in a very angry voice, "Invite me to the 5th meeting," with the clear implication, you guys will never make it. Well, we're here.
Yeah, I know who that was, but I'm not going to say either. It is funny. So this slide, George threw in this slide because this was Temple University then and to be. And when I was with MGA, we were teamed up with the Olin Group to do a new master plan for Temple. And the only thing I want to say about it, which really gets to the issue of public space, and I think they're going to do this finally, the essence of the plan was to clear out a bunch of 1960s obsolete lab buildings in the middle of campus facing what was then the Paley Library and create a huge new green space for Temple that it fundamentally didn't have in the middle of campus. They built the new library that is going to face what this green space is going to become, They still have to tear down a couple of old buildings, but as far as I know, they're planning to do it.
Oh, they're very proud of it. Yeah, they're talking about it. It's different than these drawings, but it's happening, and that's part of the process.
And of course, you heard it, I guess, last month, my old boss, John Fry, now at Temple, and, he's got his plans cooking, and certainly that's part of it. So I want to get to this issue, which George and I both had a lot to do with, George in particular. We in 2007, before the Nutter administration, before Mike Nutter was even elected, through the efforts of Frank DeCicco, who was fed up with people coming into his office and asking for his opinion, or his staff's opinion, well, his opinion, about some development projects. And he told me that he felt very unqualified to be doing this and thought that the zoning code was a mess. And he got legislation through council and signed by Mayor Street at the time to create this zoning code commission to take a look at the entire thing. Mike Nutter gets elected. I become the head of planning. I stepped off of DAG. And by law, the head of planning was the chair of that commission. And I see a few of our ex-commissioners out there. It took 4 years with a terrific consultant and a wonderful group of 35, I think, people who were appointed by council, appointed by the mayor, appointed from community groups across the city to retool this thing into something that was more sensible. Now, is it a perfect document? I'd say no. We all knew that it was going to have to be revisited, we thought, in about 5 years. But in 2012, I think much to everybody's amazement, even mine, the thing actually passed and became law. It was not simple. There were a few members of the commission from the political side who were working hard to make sure that it never got passed. Names will go unmentioned. But it did pass. And it took a book that was 700 pages long, and it cut it down to 400 pages. And it involved a lot more diagrams and charts so that people could start to make sense of what it said. I can't repeat the phrasing of it, but I do remember that Paul Levy called me once and said, when I was in civic life, so public life, and said, what does this paragraph about the Benjamin Franklin Parkway actually say? I don't know if you remember this, Paul. And if you don't, you can claim I'm making up the story. It doesn't matter.
Let's see if I agree with what you're saying first.
He said, what does it say? And we started reading it, and honest to God, it was incomprehensible. Partly because what it said only made sense if you had the map of what the parkway boundaries were, which is not just, the slice of road that comes through. It's much more convoluted than that. And, it was a great example, that, and I'll give you one other example, and I'm not making this up. There was a couple of lines in the industrial zoning portion of the plan that said, in this particular industrial zone, you were allowed to manufacture the following things: spaghetti, ravioli, I cited a couple of other two things. The words penne were not it's pasta rather, were not in common use. And by law, it actually meant that if you weren't making one of those pastas that were cited, you were technically illegal and you would have to go to the zoning board to get a variance. I'm not aware of any variances about pasta makers, but the code was replete with this stuff. If you wanted to build a fence around your property, where it was legal to do so, you could only build a fence that was 3'6" high. But if you wanted to buy a fence at Home Depot or Lowe's, you could pretty much only buy a 4-foot fence, because that's what they came in. All those people had to get zoning variances. The thing was just full of this kind of craziness, not to mention the larger scale things and the fact that it lacked any serious provisions for mixed use. Not to mention the whole process. And I will take a fair bit of credit and blame for registered community organizations, which was an extremely well-intended idea that had its issues from the get-go, because people thought that we were giving out power, and we actually weren't. We were trying to give out the demand for developers to talk to communities in an organized way. We can ask questions about that later. But one of the things that's on this screen had to do with how to deal with larger buildings. In New York in the 20s, when that zoning code was written, the way that it was dealt with through a series of straightforward setbacks that made, a certain amount of sense, and you've all seen pictures of these New York sort of wedding cake buildings. George was a consultant to the zoning code writer, our consultant for that, and we developed out of it this idea called skyplane. You want to talk about what skyplane is?
This is your event.
I know, but I want you to talk about it.
Believe me, Skyplane would not have happened without this man. Our notion was that the visibility of the sky for the pedestrian was the priority, and so we certainly had a lot of affinities to those early New York designs, but we found a much simpler way to measure it, and we tried to make criteria that were very flexible, that enabled very many different types of buildings to be built. And this diagram, which probably looks quite complex, was part of validating both the numbers and the scheme. Comcast 1 was already built, and we were testing it to see how it would meet Skyplane if Skyplane were in effect at the time it had been built. And it basically did. It had a minor failure on the Arch Street side, where it backed up pretty close to Arch Street and with a sheer wall, but we looked at that. And so it was very carefully validated, and I think that had a lot of influence on the next part, which in this drawing comes from Foster, and you were there. I wasn't there in the room.
Yeah, so Comcast 2 gets built, and John Gattuso, who was the developer and a very design-minded developer at that, says, no, I want to honor Skyplane. And we actually met on several occasions. A lot of diagrams were developed by the Foster firm that designed Comcast 2 to make it meet Skyplane. And as George said, the premise was not about sunlight, it was about sky visibility. And the kind of, you might say, the whipping boy in all this story, or whipping boys, were the major apartment houses on JFK. The Sterling, the whatever, and the Kennedy House and the one across the street, that would be completely in violation of Skyplane principles because of the lack of visibility to the sky and the sense of openness that visibility to the sky creates, separate from where the sun is itself. It's just a brightness to the sky. And that was sort of the genius thing about it that I always thought was amazing. George worked out all the details. It became part of the code, and the first big project to come along, which was this Comcast 2, and they honored it and made it work, including a lot of fussiness where the building sets back between the office piece and the hotel piece. And I remember John Gattuso was very insistent that he was going to make this thing work, even though what was off about it was minuscule. And I was the one who kept saying, oh, don't worry about that. And he said, no, we're gonna make this thing work to the regulations that you've developed. So it was really very heartening. And again, and in fact, George and I have done presentations on it at, I think, some SCUP event or AIA event.
AIA 2016.
Right. And we even got calls from other entities, particularly one from San Francisco, wanting to know, like, what did you do? How did you do this? What's it about? So it was nice. And the result of the zoning code effort 4 years later was also during that time that we had to, within the planning house, we said, well, if we're developing this new book of rules, I guess we need to develop a new plan for the city to figure out where the rules ought to be used and how to use them. And that was the genesis of Philadelphia 2035. And I remember going to the mayor and saying, well, we want to do this. And he said, okay. We didn't have any money. And I said, that was okay. I wanted to do this in-house with our own staff. We had tremendous planning capacity within the Planning Commission, and most of the folks in the Planning Commission were administering outsiders to do planning. And I said, well, one, we can't afford it, and two, we've got talent right here. And so we turned this into an in-the-house operation. Laura Spina's here, now in the private land, but heavily instrumental in making this happen. Danielle DeLeo-Kin was brought in as a consultant, thank you, paid before by the William Penn Foundation. I mean, you start to see how this stuff all comes together. And that plan, which led to 18 different district plans, as well as some overall sort of issues about the city as a whole, got done. Those 18 plans did not get done while I was still there. There were several of them that got done while Ann was in charge, Ann Fedulin, but it got done. And it created the template for what do we do. Now, to the point, what do we do is still a function, particularly as it involved rezonings in various neighborhoods, involved the cooperation of council. And we, and I would say Eleanor Sharp, who would come back to the Planning Commission as deputy director and head of kind of the connection to council, now she's actually works for council, made a fair bit of it happen. And then there was some that didn't happen because, well, to be honest, council is council, and some members were cooperative and others were less cooperative. But you can see the kind of incremental progress that gets made along the way, and this is the extraordinary sort of behind-the-scenes effort that it takes to make it so. What's next?
The building.
Oh, there it is.
George first. For George.
What's that?
George,
Yeah. So, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll
about
say
that?
something now, because we're going to start with the next, these are the last two slides. Some people will be happy, some people will be sad. That we're going to start to make a transition to some ideas that I hope will follow through in the discussion period. But when we had coffee a couple of weeks ago, Alan said something very interesting that he'd also said during the zoning code work, that the big buildings that face open space, that face a public space, can be even bigger, and they may not need setbacks. And indeed, Skyplane does not require a setback for a building that is on a big space. Parkway is a good example of that, and we call them the Three Sisters here, but I'll let you comment on those buildings.
Well, the Three Sisters being the Parkway House up at 22nd and Parkway, the Philadelphian, where Greta and I now live, and the 2601 Pennsylvania. Three big buildings built, I'd say, within 20 years of each other. I think that's right. What was Parkway House?
56, I
56.
think.
2601 was late 50s, and no, maybe even earlier, early 50s. And Philadelphian was 1963. And, look, I'll admit, if you proposed a building of that size now, probably in anywhere in the city, there'd be a lot of pushback. But there they are, there they are. They make sense facing the Parkway in this big open space. And even in the case of the Philadelphian, on the Fairmount Avenue side, there's a fair bit of good activity, and it's pretty comfortable. And one of the things that occurred to me, actually, when I was still in the city, was that people, as a matter of words, people have all kinds of anxieties about big buildings. And they often said, and I heard this like 100 times, said, I don't like that building because it's going to loom over me. And I would often think to myself, and I said this to people, like, what does that actually mean? Does it mean, like, do you get a bellyache when you walk by it? Or what happens? And yet there's so many places in the city, including everything around Rittenhouse Square, including the 20-story apartment house that's in the middle of the 2000 block of Locust, right around the corner, including these buildings and Parktown Place coming a little later, being another set, those 4 buildings there, straight out of the Le Corbusier playbook, that seem to be okay. And even, George mentioned this, even Comcast 1, with a 1,000-foot sheer glass wall on Arch Street. You don't hear much about it. Oh, and by the way, with a gargantuan entrance to the loading dock, that's a more important problem, to be honest. 1,000-foot wall, and it's like, well, okay. Does it create big shadows? Of course it creates big shadows. The sun doesn't move, the earth moves, but the sun changes. Shadows change during the day. They're not static, so what you capture even in a drawing and an image is a really short-term event as things move. And of course, the other thing is, as we know in Philadelphia, not at the moment, but in the summer, it's really hot and humid. And sometimes the shade is a good thing. So I think I came to see and believe that the capacity of the city to take things that people, as a matter of words, react pretty badly to, turn out in many cases to be okay. Another example, and we had a big fight about this in the Zoning Code Commission, was small blocks. You know, there's lots of, in North Philadelphia and South Philadelphia, there's an endless number of small blocks with very narrow cartways, 2-story row houses. And you see it particularly in places like Point Breeze, where people were buying these buildings, wanted them to be bigger, and built 3rd stories. And you can understand the anxiety that people who had lived there for a while had about these things. First of all, some of them were downright ugly and just kind of poorly done. And some of them were done better, but were clearly an indication of neighborhood and change. And the change itself was problematic to many people, as you might expect it to be. So we tried to devise ideas in the zoning code to enable these kinds of things to happen, but do it responsibly. It's pretty hard for a zoning code to do that, because well-designed zoning codes don't actually dictate well-designed things. Individual design dictates well-designed things. Zoning code, if you make an analogy of a zoning code to carpentry, you know, building a nice piece of furniture, zoning is like a 9-inch circle saw. It cuts wood fabulously. Like, take a big chunk of wood, want to cut it in half, want to cut it in quarters, great. Zoning can't be beat. But when you start to get into the finery of it, it's not a great tool. Now, you can make it a great tool. Some zoning codes in this country are so-called form-based zoning codes, and they very specifically limit and tell you what you can and can't do. Those can work, but you gotta expect that a lot of things are gonna come out the same as a result. And the diversity and the vibrancy of the character of Philadelphia is also part of its charm and its history. So it's a very tough balancing act to make. One of the other pieces of the zoning code that George had a fair bit to do with, particularly whispering in my ear, was about civic design review. And I also give a lot of credit to Gary Hack, who was the dean at Penn School of Design at the time, who said, look, big projects have bigger impacts, smaller projects, much less so. And so civic design review was really invented to make sure that certain kinds of big projects had an additional airing in the public, as viewed by people who knew what they were looking at, including every time at least one member of the community that was impacted. And then the question was, and it's come up a number of times, why isn't civic design review approval veto? Like it's either going to happen or it's legally not. And the answer was pretty simple. If we had insisted that it be approval veto, the entire zoning code would never have passed. And so we made a political decision that said airing out design in public is a value, whether it's absolutely required or not. I mean, the review is required, the approval veto maybe not so. Has it worked? I would say in a very general way it actually has. It's another contributor to why their design bar in this city is higher. Does it work in every condition out there? It does not. There's any number of buildings that you just look at and think, ugh, how did that happen? You know, they're better than they often could have been. Some of those big apartment houses down at Washington and Broad, some of the big ones on Spring Garden, and you know, the kind of 300, 400, 500 blocks, those are really big buildings. And in some cases, the designers have tried to give them a life, and in other cases, not so much. I would guess that many of those buildings went through civic design review.
I guess, but also there's no neighbors to some of them.
Some of that's true as well. So none of these systems are perfect, but they're sure as hell better than not having anything at all to make sure that these things get aired properly. I think we'd like to open it up
We
to
have one
questions.
more slide.
We do have one more slide. I don't remember that. Oh, I don't remember this one.
Well,
This slide, I mean. I remember this place.
again, battles we've lost at DAG, but we win. I mean, the DAG brand advanced with many losses. The only physical public demonstration that we ever organized so far was about this. So one Saturday morning, we convened in the middle of Broad Street with signs and yelling at cars and whatnot, and I don't think anybody listened to us. But what you see here is the lower part of a very nice tall building, which was the Liberty Title and Trust, 1929. Next to it are the two buildings that were originally for the Philadelphia Life Insurance Company. The one in the middle, 1915, Aldo Jerkal was the architect.
Jurgla.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Aiden Lager was the architect
of the older buildings with the
of
two
the 1915.
the two piers in the middle.
Right, and then to the left, you see there's a little jewel there, a very important building that was widely respected internationally by Aldo Jurgla in 1962, because it's an example of contextual modernism. And you can see how the small building, let me make sure everybody sees which one it is. That's the Jurgla building there. This is before Alan was before he graduated from high school, I think.
Yes.
They did this, so we can't assign the building to him. But the Convention Center Authority, in its infinite wisdom, made a deal with the Preservation Alliance at the time to save 15 buildings, and then they reneged on the deal because it wasn't written in the proper way, long before Paul. And these two buildings, they were saying, oh, we're going to make a park. Well, you're going to make a park in the shadow of a 20-story building. Probably not a great idea to start with. But we wanted to save those buildings because this was a filmmaker's dream. I mean, you have 3 buildings 1929, 1915, and 1962 that all work together, that serve as a city, an urban framework, and they're across the street from the Academy of Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. It was an incredible ensemble. And we, of course, recognize that, but as architects, we're used to nobody listening to us or understanding what we're excited about. And indeed, those two buildings were torn down, and there's like a windswept disaster there now.
So this gets to the part that Joy and I talked about sort of disasters that were prevented and disasters that weren't prevented. So I think, at least in any of our lifetimes in Philadelphia, the biggest disaster that was prevented was the South Street Expressway. I mean, can you imagine? Think about the Vine Street Expressway. Can you imagine what would have not happened by way of growth and entrepreneurship and vibrancy had there been a thing of the dimension of the Vine Street Expressway between South and Bainbridge? Hard to imagine. I mean, what an unbelievable mess that would have been. And we would have still been recovering from it, just like we're still recovering from the Vine Street Expressway, just like we're still recovering in many ways from I-95, with now major things about to happen in construction that aren't going to fix all of it, but they're going to fix a key part of it. And I was very much part of that story, the cover that's being built over I-95 that's going to continue Old City right down to the river. And that took a decade to pull off. And it took, I don't know, it must be up to $400 million or more. Inga, do you know how much money? At least, right? It started out as $250 million. It's got to be a lot more than that now. And in the end, it's one block, you know? It's one block from Chestnut to Walnut. So, how do you tackle these big things? And on this thing here, while those two little buildings for Philadelphia Life were very important in the history of Mitchell Jergel, and I think that little addition is really pretty remarkable. The more amazing thing is that what replaced it, the big front to the convention center, I can only think of one time in the life of that convention center that I used the convention center from that side.
Right.
From that side. It's got this colossus entrance, and it was, by the way, American Institute of Architects convention in whenever it was. It goes largely unused. Like, what is that about? The entrance to the convention center, here's a question. The flower show is going to come up in a month. Everybody, if you asked anybody in Philadelphia, how do you get to the flower show? I'll tell you, you go into 12th and Arch. A nice, vibrant corner. It's actually quite pleasant. But why doesn't the Convention Center Authority or the Philadelphia Horticultural Society say, no, I want everybody coming in through Market Street, through the Reading Terminal Head House? That's a legitimate entrance to the convention center. Why do we deprive the biggest street in town that opportunity? Honestly, I don't get it. I think we ducked a big problem with the arena. Now we got to figure out, okay, so now what are we doing? And then, so let's stick with Market Street a minute. A little reminder about things you do that then become permanent. 8th and Market. When was Gimbel's torn down? 1980, 81, something like that? It's all going to get redone, and there it sits. What is it, 26, 36, 46, 45 years later. There it sits. So when you hear ideas like, oh, let's tear down the rest of the blocks on the south side of Market from sort of 9.5 up to 11, you just got to say, well, maybe that's an okay idea eventually, but why would you do that now without knowing what you're supposed to be doing later? It's those kinds of things that organizations like DAG, that Inga, that Center City District, that the Preservation Alliance all need to combine to say, wait a minute, you're not thinking about this the right way. And really put pressure on the city and on commercial interests to sort of sit back and do the right thing. We know how to do this.
Okay, there are questions?
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, we're going to move to questions. I'm going to give this microphone to Eli.
Feather had her hands up first. Go to Feather.
I can say that we have, as DAG, met with the Horticultural Society about the Market Street entrance,
I'm sure they
so
have.
there's some stuff coming there. Maybe not this year, but in the future.
First,
Make it an easy one, Feather.
no, I'm going to put you, and among friends, I'm going to put you on the spot.
All right.
But I would like to correct for the record, the conversation in which Alan signaled that he was going into the public sector happened after the primary. We all knew it was going to be Michael Nutter. And he got up and he walked across the field, across the conference room in the William Penn Foundation and said what he said. And I, who had been in political life myself, said, this guy's going into the administration. So it was, don't ever try to deny it. You've sugarcoated it a little bit. You're pretending you don't remember.
I'm not pretending. I truly don't remember.
But I mean,
I take your word
and
for it,
I can
however.
bring witnesses who remember, including the current president of the William Penn Foundation. My question to you, Alan, I think all that you've said about the value of DAG and the collective informal group of people, you talk about the bar being raised, but then I think that kind of falls apart in the last couple, 3, 4, 5 years, particularly with the whole arena thing. I won't place judgment. I know that was the word I was going to use, anger, but I wasn't. Can you imagine a way for the city to, or parts of the city to coalesce around a responsible voice or voices or institution that provides this kind of counterpoint to developers buy it, they get to do what they want. And that's kind of the feeling that I have about the city right now, and it's pretty discouraging.
I feel this backsliding, for sure. I guess in a certain way, you hope that you do all these things. I mean, look, William Penn Foundation put a lot of money into a lot of different causes that built up the culture, as did all of us. You hope when you do that, you have institutionalized a point of view about excellence that sticks. Well, turns out to be really hard. And, you're doing it against a city culture that I think has a much deeper history. And I don't mean going back to William Penn. I mean going back 70, 80 years. And so, I guess in some ways, we shouldn't be surprised that there's inevitably going to be some backsliding. And I think there has been real backsliding. The arena thing, leave aside whether the arena was good idea, bad idea, could have been better. Leave all that aside. The process by which it unfolded was awful. And it's not that people who have ambition, developers or others who have ambition, it's not that there's anything wrong with them proposing things that then get a proper airing. But the proper airing part of it and the systematic way that that's gone about is key to all this. And it just didn't happen there. And then in the end, the Sixers did what they probably should have done in the first place, which was cut a deal with Comcast and figure it out. Because the site was ultimately, I thought for a brief moment that there might be a way to pull this off that was respectful of the city streets and could connect things in a way that would make sense. And I even did one of those sketches and shared it with PIDC, because I was part of I'm still on the PIDC design review. And it was shown to the Sixers, and they said, well, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. So their mindset was in the wrong place from the get-go, big surprise. And more importantly, the city itself wasn't leaning in and saying, you know what, this is, you want to do this, fine, but you got to do this the right way. And it just wasn't there. I recall, by the way, and there were only two witnesses to that. Terry, are you still here? Yeah, Terry Gillen. Terry was there, and Andy Altman, and I. I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. You tell me if I'm wrong, Terry. The three of us were asked to go review some design idea that the Foxwoods people had for how to do up the gallery when there was a moment in time when they wanted to move from the Foxwoods site on Delaware Avenue to the gallery. And they unfolded this huge drawing, and I think the three of us stood there kind of aghast. And finally, I know I said, and I'm sure Terry and Andy agreed with this, like, this is a non-starter. This is just a non-starter. It's terrible. What you're proposing is a terrible idea. And they actually took it pretty well under the circumstances. And ironically, this being Philadelphia, that was Brian Ford was the kind of sort of face of that whole thing at the time. And later in life, of course, who winds up being the chair of the Drexel Committee on Finances and Human Resources that I had to appear before for 5 years straight? Brian Ford. But he was always very gracious and was very nice to me, so I guess no complaints in the end. But the city's got to bring the talent it needs into the city and have people who have the authority to go to people and say things like, that's a non-starter. And I don't see that muscle right now. I wish I did, but I don't. Other questions? Go ahead, Eli, go find people with hands raised.
Hello, wonderful presentation. What policy levers do you think that we could lean into moving forward, sort of like a sky plane, that we haven't yet as a city utilized that could really help guide sensible development, put in the guardrails for great development moving forward?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I know the answer. If anybody else has a thought about answers, I'd love to hear it. I think that I really believe that the cultural or disposition of the community as it is heard by the political entity is critical to all of this. If DAG or if anybody else who's been part of this says, well, that's nice what they think, but we're going to do this over here, and none of that's taken seriously, we got a big problem. And I don't think you get to solve it purely with policy and tools, because in order to get to the policy and tools, you frequently have to make laws or change policies within agencies. And if the disposition is not there to do it, you can come up with all kinds of great ideas, but they're never going to grab on. So I think, the three ways that things get done in a big city are when there's an alignment of three entities: government, the community at large, and business. When those three entities can come together around ideas, they happen. And I, because you're sitting right near Paul, I'm going to make an example not Paul, out of you, but when did you first propose the ideas that you had for the Parkway? What year was that, roughly? 1990 is even earlier than I thought. Okay, 1999. And here we are, 27 years later, and while many of the ideas that Paul was promoting at the time about urbanizing and building more buildings and making it into an urban stretch aren't happening, but the idea of a more pedestrian-friendly, compressed road to make it at least more walkable are only now happening. So why didn't it happen when Center City District proposed it? Well, because there wasn't that alignment. And when you look at big projects, like people, when the High Line opened in New York, people said, oh my God, where'd that come from? Like, that's just amazing. It came out of nowhere. Well, it came out of 30 years worth of conversations and fussing and pushing, both financial levers, planning levers, community organizing levers. That's how those things happen, even in New York, where people think they happen like lightning. That's kind of the hard kind of scut work that has to happen for any serious idea to take hold. And you got to get those three bits and pieces, well, not bits and pieces, but those three critical pieces aligned. So I think, in a way, a lot of the answer is more organizing, more interconnection between DAG and community at large, with government, with business interests. I think it's that integration that is ultimately why things happen. If that is a helpful answer. It's a bit of a dodgy answer, but that's all I got.
Yeah, I did. I feel like one of the negative things that's happened, not just in Philly, but in a lot of cities, has been the growth of community benefit agreements and sort of the atomization of like planning and sort of pushing, like a lot of city officials pushing these decisions down to community groups and saying, well, you can decide, and therefore I don't have to decide. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I have a lot of comments on that, but I'll give you one, Terry. Listen, we all grew up, most of us, grew up as kids at a time when big-time planning was the way things were happening. Moses, Ed Logan, Boston, Edward Bacon here. It's the way it was. And in the 60s and then ultimately into the 70s, for a lot of different reasons, that big-time planning infrastructure got undone. And Jane Jacobs was a piece of that. I have a talk on this one. Richard Nixon was a piece of that. Frank Rizzo was a piece of that. But they came at it from very different perspectives. But the ultimate outcome was that community voice was given a much bigger role in planning. And I think if we asked any of us right now, we'd say, well, that's a huge role that communities have in thinking about what happens. I think that's all fairly straightforward and legit. But here's the part that's missing. And I tell this to my students all the time, and I just said it this last week in a talk I gave at Drexel. There's one group that is never at the table when things are going on. One group. You know who they are? The future. The future's not at the table. How could they be, right? And so communities often have a point of view about what ought to happen. I lived through this one as an architect. Very loud voices about something that they think ought to be. And by the time it comes for the something to actually take form, the voice that said it had moved. They didn't move because of what we were going to do. They moved because life changes, right? It's like, oh, well, okay. And, I don't want to be, I'm sorry to be a little crude about this. People move, people die. Things change in neighborhoods all the time towards some future that, at least from my perspective as an architect, that we as professionals, as architects, as planners, as community organizers, we need to not speak for like we know, but we need at least to put the voice at the table, try to put the voice at the table and say, what's the right thing to do in the long haul? So if I'm understanding your question, Terry, I think that's often what's missing here. And community voice is important, but it's not the end of the story. It can't be. These things we do, a building, a decent institutional building or commercial building could easily, in a city like Philadelphia, we're talking about 50 and 100-year projects. We're talking about planning things that could last longer. So I think we need to be clear that that's a part of what has to happen. And the way you do that, among other ways, is you have to have a strong planning entity. You have to have a political administration that respects it, and staff it with people who are capable of living at that level of strategic thinking.
I'm somebody that takes the Market Frankfurt line a lot, and I've always been curious about why there are so many stops on East Market Street where there's not too much development. There's some, but almost no stops between 15th Street and 30th Street.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
where the skyscrapers are.
Yeah. That's a very big Philadelphia historical accident. If you remember, between 15th Street and 30th Street, there used to be this thing referred to as Chinese Wall, right? And so while the thought of having stops there has been around forever, in fact, I know it was embedded in the city capital plan because I saw it, always in the out years, right? Someday we'll get there. At the time, it was not thought to be necessary because nobody had a great example of trying to think through the future, right? And then buildings started to get built, and actually putting a Market subway stop there, which would be the most important thing, turns out to be remarkably hard. Not impossible, but the geography that surrounds it at that point is really, really difficult. So to do it would be a very big deal, and a very expensive big deal. And so I think, SEPTA's, I'm sure, attitude is, you're talking about some colossally expensive project, and hey, by the way, we've got these trolley stops there, so all you got to do is get off and switch to the trolley. Well, yeah, sort of true, maybe, but they don't make it easy. And that's why the stop's not there. It's very frustrating. There should be at least 2 other stops there, you could argue.
George, do you want to take us out here?
Just another footnote to that point is that Ed Bacon was hysterically concerned that the city would move to the west and the center would not be the center anymore. That's one of the reasons he was very supportive of Market East, of the sort of mega structure plans that originally started in Market East. And so I don't think Ed Bacon was a big fan of more access to the west because he thought that was a way of keeping the center in the center. I think he was wrong on that myself, but more detail.
We're at time, so if you want
Oh,
to wrap us up.
well,
Jack, do you want to get one question in?
Just why don't you get to this one
Yeah,
question?
Jack, why don't you get that one? Thank you.
Well, this is kind of a segue to that because I don't think there can be any serious discussion about enhancing the vitality and attractiveness of Center City without addressing the issue of revitalizing Market Street East. It's got to be.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to the days when there were all these department stores all along there. And so I'd like to get, Alan, your ideas. What are some of your ideas about revitalizing Market Street East? It's essential if we're going to improve.
Yeah, well, you're totally right about it. We've got the biggest opportunity we have for it are the 2 blocks south side between, I call it 9.5 and 11. And you look at what the National Real Estate folks did on the 1100 block, right? With now leaving aside Iron Hill and why they closed, that was more of a bigger corporate problem. I honestly don't understand what the problem was, but leave that aside for the moment. They built multiple buildings, they created through-block passages, they revitalized a back street that never had any standing, Ludlow Street. That's a really solid urban design set of ideas. Done pretty respectfully and responsibly, I would say. If we could get 2 more of those, I would consider that a huge victory. Then, my staff and I probably spent 4 years trying to get the gallery undone and redone. And I blame myself for some of this. I'm not happy with the way the Fashion District looks. I think it got too tarted up with signs and all kinds of other stuff that happens. But I am happy about how they brought some life back to the street, that they made an on-level entrance. And oddly, I think it was two winters ago, a bunch of us in the building said, we were going to do Jewish Christmas, and so we decided we're going to go see a movie and go to Chinatown. And we went to the AMC theater there, which we had never been to, and we go up there, and I thought, damn, this is actually really nice. This is actually a really nice theater. Its entrance on Filbert is kind of, I appreciate the attempt, but it's a little disappointing. Why isn't the entrance on Market Street? Or why isn't the entrance a little more, just built up? It's a nice theater. It was where the arena was going to go. And so I thought, gee, now we get this theater back. There's more to be done on the fashion district to make it a better urban neighbor. But there's a lot to be done about coordinating with Chinatown, about trying to bring the energy of Chinatown forward with the entrepreneurial spirit that exists there. There are ways to do it physically. There's a lot of work to do in terms of creating a relationship with both the business and the residential community in Chinatown to get people together, thinking that this is a good thing. Paul Stanky still here? I don't see him. Paul and I had a conversation ages ago about how do we bring the Reading Terminal Market forward to Market Street, right? Through Filbert, through that Fieldhouse Sports Bar, up into the front area so that there's a real presence. There's conversations to be had with the Marriott Hotel. Their presence on Market Street, I think the technical term is sucks. It's terrible. It's terrible. They only recently reopened the entrance doors from that side, I think. So every step of the way, there are both big scale and smaller scale things that need to be done that are not so unknown, but they need a lot of organizational work behind the scenes to make them happen.
Well, with that, yes, join me in thanking Alan. We track how many people. We track how many people sign up versus how many people show up, and you have the highest rate of when people sign up for you, they attend. So thank you for being with us. We'll be back here on March 26th with Raheem Manning. Thank you all for coming out.